Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a literal and figurative deep dive into one of the most visionary, influential works of fiction ever put to paper, Jules Verne's absolute masterpiece, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. We're going to explore the thrilling plot, the shockingly prophetic technology, and the massive real-world legacy of this incredible novel.
Right off the bat, listen to this quote from our narrator, Professor Aronnax. "The deepest parts of the ocean are totally unknown to us. What goes on in those distant depths? It's almost beyond conjecture." When Jules Verne published those words back in 1869, the deep ocean was a complete, terrifying mystery. And what's truly wild to think about is that even today, well over a century later, scientists readily admit we still know more about the surface of Mars than we do about our own oceans. Honestly, that enduring mystery is exactly what gives this story its dark power and otherworldly fascination.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our navigational chart for today. First up, the ocean's great unknown. Then, inside the legendary Nautilus. After that, Nemo and the crew, followed by freedom, confinement, and vengeance. And finally, a century ahead of time.
Section 1. The Ocean's Great Unknown.
So, the story kicks off in 1866, and the entire globe is gripped by panic over a massive, mysterious sea monster striking ships infinitely faster than any known whale could. But before we go chasing this beast into the depths, we really need to clear up a major misconception about the book's title. When people hear 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, they almost always assume it's talking about depth. But in Verne's context, a league is actually a unit of distance equal to about 2.16 miles. It refers to the total distance traveled under the water, not how deep they went.
To put that into perspective, 20,000 leagues actually equals 80,000 kilometers, or roughly 40,000 nautical miles. That is nearly twice the circumference of the entire Earth. This brilliantly illustrates the massive, unprecedented scale of this underwater tour. They aren't just sinking straight down into the dark. They are going on a sprawling, global road trip beneath the waves.
Actually, a fun fact here. The original French title was plural, seas with an S. Verne was taking us on a tour of all the major oceans. But getting this epic vision to print wasn't exactly smooth sailing. The book had a highly difficult gestation period. Verne was constantly butting heads with his publisher, Pierre Hetzel, churning through multiple drafts and working titles between 1865 and 1869 just to get everything exactly right.
Section 2. Inside the legendary Nautilus.
So when our protagonists finally encounter that supposed sea monster, they discover it's not a beast at all. It's a gigantic, futuristic submarine. Now, to truly appreciate what Verne did here, we have to look back at history. Real early submarines from the 18th and 19th centuries were cramped, highly experimental, and honestly, incredibly dangerous. Take Bushnell's Turtle from 1776. It was literally a tiny egg-shaped wooden barrel that could barely fit one person and only dive a few feet. In stark contrast, Verne's Nautilus was a sleek, massive marvel designed for prolonged, deep-sea exploration and extreme luxury.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer engineering detail Verne provides. He wasn't just throwing out magic concepts. The Nautilus features a 70-meter cylindrical double hull made of boilerplate steel, capable of withstanding immense ocean pressure. It utilizes electric propulsion, which was a massive leap for the time, and incredible life support systems designed to extract oxygen directly from the seawater. That was something early submarine builders couldn't even fathom.
Verne was incredibly tapped into emerging technology. He basically took the bleeding edge of real science and pushed it to its absolute limits. The name itself is actually a tribute to Robert Fulton's 1800 submarine, the Nautilus, and the core design was deeply inspired by the French Navy's Plongeur, which was a submarine model Verne studied up close at the 1867 Exposition Universelle in Paris.
Section 3. Nemo and the Crew.
Of course, it's the characters that give this story its immense, brooding power. Our lens into this world comes from three castaways who are pulled aboard the Nautilus. First, we have Professor Aronnax, a career scientist who becomes deeply conflicted, totally torn between the ethical horror of his capture and the sheer scientific wonder of the voyage. Then there's his loyal servant, Conseil, this compulsive, humorous classifier of facts. And finally, Ned Land, the heroic, hot-tempered Canadian harpooner who couldn't care less about science, he just wants his freedom back.
And the man keeping them captive? The incredibly enigmatic Captain Nemo. Now, here is a fascinating behind-the-scenes secret.
Nemo was originally conceived by Verne as a Polish nobleman whose family had been slaughtered by Russian troops during the 1863 uprising. He was supposed to be waging a guerrilla war of vengeance against Tsarist Russia. However, France actually needed the Tsar as an ally at the time, so publisher Hetzel forced Verne to obscure Nemo's nationality completely to avoid any political fallout. Because of that, in the novel, Nemo's background remains a dark, mysterious secret.
Section 4. Freedom, Confinement, and Vengeance.
These are the heavy, churning themes that really drive the narrative forward. You see, the Nautilus represents two entirely different things depending on who you ask. For Captain Nemo, it is the ultimate tool of freedom. It separates him from the constraints and the corruption of human society, giving him the power to live and strike entirely on his own terms. But for Aronnax, Conseil, and Ned Land, this incredible vessel is nothing more than a gilded prison. Sure, they are treated to underwater cities and sunken wonders, but they are confined there against their will for the rest of their lives.
And you can see how this isolation absolutely warps Nemo. He's a genius, an inventor, a musician, but his obsessive hate leads to these ugly, glaring contradictions. I mean, he's a freedom fighter who acts as a jailer. He goes completely out of his way to save human and animal lives, yet he turns around and uses the Nautilus to ram warships, committing mass murder. He violently detests imperialism, but then he goes and claims the South Pole for himself. Ultimately, this hate just swallows him whole, pushing him into deep depression and madness.
Section 5. A century ahead of time.
Jules Verne gets called the world's first science fiction writer a lot, but his marine engineering in this book was shockingly authoritative. He didn't just guess, he actively prophesied open-sea submarines, electric propulsion, self-contained diving suits, and the use of hydroplanes decades before any of it became a reality. These weren't just fantasy magic spells, they were highly specific, functional, technical specifications.
And this brilliantly illustrates his true legacy, the people he inspired. This explainer just wouldn't be complete without highlighting that 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea served as a literal blueprint and inspiration for generations of real-world discoverers. Submarine engineer Simon Lake, polar explorer Ernest Shackleton, and Dr. Robert Ballard, the guy who found the Titanic, were all deeply influenced by it. Jacques Cousteau, arguably the most renowned marine explorer in history, literally called this novel his shipboard Bible.
At the climax of the story, as our three captives finally attempt their desperate escape, a depressed and manic Nemo seemingly drives the Nautilus straight into a deadly, inescapable whirlpool known as the Maelstrom. Now, Aronnax survives to write his journal, but he leaves us with these massive lingering questions. Did the Nautilus withstand the Maelstrom's clutches? Is Captain Nemo still alive down there? It's a brilliant ending, because just like the deepest parts of our own oceans, Verne's masterful story keeps its greatest secrets hidden safely in the depths.